Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and this is my co-host.
I'm Chris Huddleston.
And I, for one, am very excited to talk about the film today. We watched The Lighthouse.
Tell me, what's a timberman want with being a wickie?
Just looking to earn a living, just like any man. Starting new.
On the run. Keeping secrets, are you?
No, sir.
Why don't you spill your beans? Why don't you spill your beans? Why don't you spill your beans? How long have we been on this rock? 5 weeks? 2 days? Help me to recollect.
Okay, so, for those of you, obviously, you can't see the trailer. I recommend you go and watch the trailer because it's a visually stunning film. And that trailer, for one, while the audio and the audio design and the music they chose is really great, you're missing out on the sledgehammer impact of the images that they're cutting together. And there's not a lot of dialogue to explain the whole thing of the movie. But so go check out the trailer for The Lighthouse. So, Chris, do you have a synopsis for us?
I do. The Lighthouse from 2019 is the second film from director Robert Eggers. His first movie was The Witch that we talked about a good bit last week. This one stars Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, and it's the story of two lighthouse keepers who try to maintain their sanity whilst living on a remote and mysterious New England island in the 1890s.
Aye. So what'd you think?
So, if I had not seen a trailer for this and I knew nothing about this movie, and you said to me, "Hey, Chris, I want to watch this movie. It's called The Lighthouse, and it's a period piece about two men in a lighthouse together for a month. One is kind of this crusty old guy, and the other one is a younger guy. And during the day, they do repairs on the lighthouse. They repair the roof. They paint the outside of the lighthouse. And at night, they eat dinner and get drunk. And the older guy farts a lot. And the younger guy masturbates in a shed with a leaky roof." I would have said, that sounds terrible. But those are all things that happen in the movie, but it's much more than that. There is well, first of all, absolutely beautiful, gorgeous black and white cinematography.
Black and white. You just don't see that very often anymore.
No. And so I watched this with my brother-in-law, and he said he had a good question, and he knew. I told him we were going to talk about this on the podcast, and he said to me, "Why does black and white look so great?" And especially newer, movies made in the 90s and present time, the black and white, you think about something like Schindler's List or, obviously this movie, it just looks so great. And I don't know that's something that we can talk about. I don't really have an answer, but
sure.
Black and white, it just looks fantastic. You have all those elements that I talked about that in a different film maybe would be boring, but there's so much more to this. You have, first of all, start with the acting. Willem Dafoe, like I said, is this crusty old lighthouse keeper, and Robert Pattinson is this younger guy who's kind of on the run. He had been a logger, and now he's working in this lighthouse, and they're stationed there for a month. And the Pattinson slowly goes insane. Maybe Willem Dafoe does too. It's hard to say for sure.
It's hard to say. I think that's right at the heart of the movie. Is at first you're not sure precisely who the movie is about. It seems to follow Pattinson over his shoulder more closely, but it's very much a two-hander.
Right.
We follow Pattinson around during his daily work, so it becomes, a two-hander scene through Pattinson's point of view. But certainly Dafoe's character as the old sea salt from the very beginning seems somewhat deranged. Maybe been at this too long, been on the open sea too long, been alone in a lighthouse too long, because he seems a little unhinged. And we assume that Robert Pattinson's character is perfectly even keel. And then we begin to peel back the onion and we realize, well, he's not so even keel. Even though the isolation and the exposure to the other man's tyranny, it's a petty tyranny, but it is a tyranny, starts to wear him down. You start to think, oh, he's not just going nuts after a couple of weeks on the lighthouse with this guy. There's a lot of pressurized history going on that starts to come out the more his sanity frays. And there are a bunch of confusing things I hope to talk about during the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we wonder with the characters, like in the trailer, you hear the older guys like, how long have we been on this rock? And you can't tell. I couldn't tell in that scene whether he was in earnest or whether he was testing Pattinson or fucking with Pattinson. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It wasn't clear to me. Like, I'm like, whoa, are we, how did we just do a time jump? Is he coming on moored? Is he checking to see, does he think Pattinson's coming on moored and he's sort of sounding the waters? Because that happens a couple of times too, where he sort of prods Pattinson to answer questions about how long they've been there. And there's one point where he's like, you just did that. Like, I just explained this to you and you're asking me again. Like, right? I mean, do you remember that? There's a whole section of the movie where he seems to sort of be accusing Pattinson of having gone insane. Anyway, I feel like I'm getting a little too granular too quickly. I think that the black and white question does deserve just like, I am not a cinematographer, and I haven't been to film school, but I would say that the deliberate choice to make a black and white film, even in Schindler's List, as you mentioned, he couldn't resist the red coat, right?
Yeah,
colorizing.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's a weakness or a flaw. I'm just saying that he has the ability to do it, whereas originally cinema didn't allow you for that.
Right.
And you have people like Turner colorizing the old black and white films, and his argument being like, well, if they could have shot in color, they would have. Right. And purists saying, you're changing Miracle on 42nd Street or It's a Wonderful Life by making it in color. Right. It is what it is and you should leave it alone. And I don't particularly, I mean, as long as the black and white, as long as people could still watch it either way, I don't see what colorizing it, but maybe, I don't know, maybe Turner is destroying I don't know. But when you choose to make a black and white movie now, I do think we have a lot more technical controls in terms of you can just with the twist of a knob or the click of a cursor dial up contrast. And I think now we have a lot more sophisticated lighting than they probably did in the black and white era. Or if they didn't have that, if they did have that lighting, it wasn't it was mostly like, we need to be able to see him. And you know what I mean? And there was some art form to it, but now it's like, if I'm going to make a black and white movie, I have a bar to overcome, right? It needs to be so compellingly black and white that the viewer shouldn't be able to imagine it in color. And that was true for me in this. It felt like those old postcards from the 1890s, those old silver nitrate exposures of the shots of the white sky and the black rock and the light. I mean, I thought it was hugely effective.
Oh, absolutely.
And the lighting and the way that he framed up the shots paid homage to the era of the kind of melodramatic black and whites. The sort of, there's one or two places in the film where it's very explicit, where so the old man is sort of going on he's cursing Robert Pattinson and is sort of calling down Neptune and the watery deep. And I mean, it's epic poetry, but the camera
Poetry,
low
exactly.
on him and shot up, and he's lit from below. So he has this kind of he looks like Poseidon. And there's another part in the film where Pattinson is it's either explicitly he is Poseidon or Pattinson is hallucinating that he is. So it's just a powerhouse visually. It really is. And on paper, it would sound like quite a boring film.
Yeah.
I never got bored. We were talking about Gretel and Hansel not really being scary. I got a couple of little shivers here and there just from the visual design of it, but it didn't really scare me. This one scared me. I mean, there were a sequence in this that I just had.
It's nightmarish.
Not horror in a sense of modern horror where it's some terrible monster, creeping up on you, but a kind of an existential horror of there's the mermaid when she would open her mouth and it was that sort of half scream, half wail song. Oh God,
it's jagged teeth.
Oh, it's just chills pouring down my spine, and Pattinson turns and flees, and you're like, run, like, get away. And I thought it was so great because the mermaid is whenever you see it, it is a combination of intensely alluring sexually, and it's a beautiful woman and exotic and mysterious, and with a blend of like alien and horrifying and other and repulsive. And I think every time they bring the mermaid on screen is a sort of a master balance of that cocktail of the two sides. Anyway, I'm talking a lot.
No, that's fine. I was going to say with the black and white cinematography, I think it automatically, in newer films, automatically lends kind of a timelessness to you think about back to Schindler's List. If he had shot that all in color, I think you would watch it today and think, okay, this was a movie made in the 90s about World War II. Whereas you with the black and white, it's almost a time capsule of that period, of World War II period. And I feel the same way with this, where, if this would have been shot in color, I think it would have lost some of the power of that kind of postcard look, like you were saying. Yeah. And then also with the acting, you said exactly what I was going to say with, now Pattinson is great in this, but Willem Dafoe is just perfect in this role of this crusty old guy, and the dialogue that he's delivering, as you said, it's like poetry. I mean, it's just, the dialogue is great, and the way that he delivers it is just fantastic, because he has there's a couple of scenes where they're almost like soliloquies where, he's delivering this kind of flowery, in some ways crude, but kind of flowery dialogue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's not a surprise to anyone to say Willem Dafoe is a great actor.
And I think I was thinking about this. I think he's an underrated actor. I think everybody knows he's a great actor, but if you would just say to somebody, who do you think are the best actors right now of this generation, or the best actors of the last 20 years? I don't know that Willem Dafoe is somebody that immediately comes to mind to most people, but he's done, stuff like this, and then he's in like Aquaman. He'll do these.
Right.
He goes back and forth between big budget
you
movies
can't
and these small
him,
films.
right?
Oh no,
Aquaman
I'm not.
probably pays for a year of these.
Yeah,
movies,
I'm not criticizing him at all, but I'm just saying when do you ever feel like Willem Dafoe, he really phoned that in? You know what I mean? Even if it's a bad movie, he always is compelling.
The Aquaman didn't give him anything to do.
Right.
And I am not a director, but I talk about directing a lot as I perceive it through the film. And I really think that it's a brilliant piece of casting. And this director must have been like, I really see Willem Dafoe in this. He looked so great with the beard and the costume department, perfect. And he nailed that I don't know how accurate that accent was to the time or the whatever, but he sounds like the old pirates who would talk like, I mean, he just sounded perfect. Like hook, line, and sinker, I bought it. And it's a juicy choice and it's a big choice, but 110% it works,
The story I don't mean to interrupt you, but the story on this director Eggers is with, and I mean, I don't know how accurate this is, but this is what I've read, that with The Witch and with this, that he's kind of obsessive about research. So I am guessing that, they speak in this, it's the 1890s, but they speak in this, especially Dafoe, in this almost kind of old English way of speaking. And I would bet, based on what I've read about this director, that, he was going for very period specific dialogue. So I would guess that this is, pretty accurate.
And in terms of the performance, like I think in a previous episode last episode, I was talking about the kids and how I felt they felt, it seemed like they were a little abandoned by a hands-off director. And in this one, it feels like you cast a master actor like Dafoe, and you spend time sharing your research with the actor and, pointing them in avenues to do their own research and really highlighting what's important to you in the role and working with them, dialing it in a little bit until Dafoe is sort of like, so you're looking for something. And he's like, yes, that's it. Right. And you get them on track, and then you just encourage. And then you just, great. Well, let's do another take. Bigger, give me some more, you go, have more fun with it, go. And just let him off his leash. So you like dial it in and line it up. And then you just, stoke that fire and you let an actor like that run with it. And it was just so great to watch that performance. It's really some of my favorite stuff I've seen Willem Dafoe do in a long time.
Oh yeah.
And I think Pattinson does a great job in this movie too. I think he has a much harder task in the film because he's arguably the lead, and the film does not explain precisely, certainly in a clear, didactic way, what actually happens. It starts quite literal, and then there's a sort of a magical realism that comes into it that is hallucinatory. I mean, I want to talk about what you think is really going on, but the camera becomes an unreliable narrator because we are seeing the world through Pattinson's experience, which makes what Dafoe does questionable, because you're like, well, did Dafoe really do that, or is he imagining that Dafoe did that? Not to mention that Dafoe starts off early on drinking, and Pattinson resists, but then when it becomes clear that they're going to be stranded there longer than they think, it's the night before the ship's going to come, and he's like, all right, and he has a drink, and they get blind drunk, and then a storm hits the next day, and the ship doesn't come. and they kind of don't stop drinking, and they drink through all of their cache of the alcohol, burn through it really, and then they dig up a hidden cache of it, and they drink through that, and then they start drinking the lamp oil, right?
Yeah, which was, oh God.
So you don't know if both of them are going psychotic, if Pattinson was already psychotic, if it's alcoholism, or if it's, you know, some sort of a toxic poisoning, some combination of the thereof, or if there is some sort of supernatural element at play. I mean, I guess my interpretation is there isn't really anything overtly supernatural as much as they're in this kind of wild place on the edge, you know, out in the sea, and they're really in Poseidon's domain. And, you know, so it's the stuff that legends are spun from, but the visions of actual Poseidon and the actual mermaid, all of the really fantastical visions were just that, were manifestations of either psychosis or chemically induced hallucination. What did you think?
Well, so there are a few different elements that I wanted to talk. So after I watched this, I read several articles that talked about that gave interpretations of the film, and every article that I read had a different interpretation. And even there were quotes from the director and the actors, and they kind of had different viewpoints on the movie, basically. So
that's really interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's
Sure.
really interesting to me, because I could kind of feel that. By the end, it didn't feel that Pattinson and Dafoe were in precisely the same movie, but I didn't think that ruined the movie.
Right. I agree.
Just added to it added to a sense of confusion that I think was right in line with the kind of general mental decay of the characters. So anyway, go ahead.
So a few things with the kind of main elements that take place in the movie. One, early on, there are seagulls flying around, and there's a seagull that keeps bothering Pattinson. Basically, when he's out doing his duties, this seagull is flying around and kind of messing with him. And Dafoe tells him that it's bad luck to kill a seagull. And so Pattinson finally gets fed up with this seagull, and in one of the most violent animal killings, and this is a warning for people, if you have a problem with seeing an animal killed on screen, this might not be the movie for you, or you might gotta close your eyes or whatever, because it's very graphic, him beating this seagull to death. So it's almost like that is a bad omen, because that's when, so kind of a combination of that happening and Pattinson starting to drink is when everything starts to unravel.
Yeah.
So you have that happening.
Well,
then
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So the warning Dafoe gives him is notable, is jarring in the movie, because he's like, he has an argument with the gull is sort of defiantly blocking his chores, and so he throws a lump of coal at it or a rock at it, and Dafoe sees this happen. He warns him later that night, I saw you sparring with that gull, it's bad, it's bad luck. And Pattinson's like, get out of here. And he's like, it's bad luck. He really kind of loses his cool. And you think, and he says that it's the gulls are the souls of departed drowned sailors.
Right.
So there is this almost biblical, certainly mythical curse woven into that warning. And then every time we see the gull subsequently, it has a very pointed aggression towards it. We don't even know if it's the same gull, but
exactly.
It plays as the same gull. And when Pattinson kills it, I mean, I think it's worth describing the scene. Does it cause him to fall, or does he slip and fall? He's painting the thing, and right? He's painting
Mhm.
the lighthouse, and Dafoe is like sort of messing with him and lowering him down, and he slips and he falls.
Right.
And when he comes to, the gull is sort of tearing at the knee of his jeans and
Yes. Yeah.
ripping his pants. And that's the inciting event, but he ends up, does he grab it by the feet? He gets
He
a
grabs
hold of it.
when he ultimately kills it is, I believe it's when, so one of his duties is he has to clean out the cistern. So I think that's what happens is he's cleaning it out, and the gull comes and lands there, and he finally gets, and it's squawking at him, and he finally gets fed up and grabs it by the feet and just starts slamming it against the cistern and kills it. I
Yeah,
believe
like
that's what happened.
swinging it like you would have like an orange in a sock or something.
Yeah.
He just sort of wham, 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 and just winding it up. And it's a long, extended scene. I don't believe they actually killed a real
Oh, no,
bird,
no, no. There's
but
no way they killed an actual seagull, but it
but
looks real.
it looks very seamless, and it just stays on him while I was like, that must have been exhausting shooting that scene, because he's really just wailing that thing against the bricks until there's nothing left of it but the sort of bloody wings. Like the body mostly just sort of smashes off as he just again and again, he must hit it 50 times. Wham, 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 wham. And that night, the storm starts to roll in, right?
Mhm.
So you get this ominous, like, oh, he killed the bird. He wasn't supposed to kill it, right? Um, anyway, I interrupted you. So,
Well, no, that's fine. And you brought up a good point there that I kept thinking about during the movie. You said, that must have been exhausting filming that scene. And I was thinking watching this, there are being an actor in big budget movies, I've always thought there would be some really cool things about that is, if you're going to do martial arts in a movie, or you're going to be a musician and you play the piano or whatever, they would get somebody who's an expert in those different fields to train them for a few months so that they can, be as realistic with it as possible. I've always thought, that would be really fun to learn martial arts or play a guitar or whatever, to where you could fake it enough to look good on screen. But I thought with this movie, I don't know that this would have been very much fun to make, because even though he's obviously not out there painting a lighthouse all day or cleaning out a cistern or whatever, I mean, I'm sure a lot of it is him moving rocks with a wheelbarrow. And, I'm sure they didn't have him loaded up with rocks, but it's just, he's out in the rain and pushing this wheelbarrow around and everything. So I just thought, I don't know if this would have been a lot of fun making this movie, because there were definitely some things about it that seemed uncomfortable, even it had to have been from an acting standpoint, but
it felt very real.
yeah.
So it felt, watching him sort of push the wheelbarrow. So we ought to say, when I say the tyranny of Willem Dafoe is in their sort of manual or whatever he signed up for, it's like they're supposed to alternate, right? Because one person needs to tend the light of the lighthouse and make sure that nothing goes wrong with the running of the lighthouse at night, when it is, of course, the most critical for ships to see. And they were supposed to alternate that duty. So they take turns on the night shift, as it were. So Willem Dafoe says, no, the light's mine. I'm going to do that the whole time. And he's the sort of senior officer.
Right.
So what that leaves is that Pattinson's character does pretty much everything else. Willem Dafoe makes him do everything else. And in a cruel way, like hauls that whole oil tank all the way up the circular staircase, and up at the top, Dafoe says, next time use this. And he's got a little handheld thing that he could have filled up downstairs. He's like, now take that back downstairs. And watching him lug that thing up the stairs was making my back hurt. Like, I was like, oh my God, it just feels so real. And the physical labor, at the time you just felt like there aren't machines to do it for you, and everything's kind of steampunk. Like, it made you also appreciate the sort of wonder that was a lighthouse at
Yeah.
that time. Like somebody built this thing that needed to be polished and cleaned, and somebody made that giant glass housing for the light up at the top that rotates. And it really did feel like the lighthouse itself, the light and the lamp, was this kind of magical piece of technology for the time. And everything else was privies and chamber pots and lumps of coal and, big heavy things of oil and, shingles you had to paint and pry off and fix, and leaky wooden. Everything else was so subject to the elements out there on that rock, and the sea is so corrosive, and you felt it. So when the gull was like picking at a tear in his pants, it wasn't just like this annoying bird, get off of me, but it's like, no, not, your pants are a utility. It's like he's
Yeah.
destroying my pants, and I may not have 5 other pairs of pants, or I have to fix these pants, and then they're going to have this big mend on them. It's like the preciousness, you war movies, you talk about the boots and the stealing boots off of the dead soldiers, but you're kind of like, we don't think about our clothing and things as, integral to our, not just comfort, but survival. But you really felt this here. And that the drinking was almost self-medicating in a way. It wasn't like they just, let's get drunk. It's like, this is a really hard life. And yeah, they get blind drunk, and they get blind drunk every night,
And I read that, I don't know if this is true, because I don't know if this was coming directly from, I don't know if this was a quote from him, but I've read that to kind of add to the uncomfortable nature of things with the movie, that Pattinson, in a method kind of a way, that in one of the scenes where they're drunk, he purposely pissed himself so that he was filming the scenes, with pants that he had pissed in. So just to add to the realism, I guess, of it, but you brought up the thing about Dafoe, and that he is the only one who can go up and tend to the actual light part, and that becomes an obsession for Pattinson. He wants to get up there. He argues with him about that he should be able to do that, and Dafoe says, he's the boss, that it's solely his job. And some of that leads to the weird elements of it, where Dafoe is up there, and Pattinson will see him from the outside, and Dafoe takes his clothes off, so he's nude in the
sort of
lighted part.
bathing in the light.
Exactly, almost bathing in the light. And at one point, the floor that Dafoe stands on is, it's kind of this graded floor, so there are holes in the bottom of it. And there's one scene where Pattinson goes up there, and he's looking up through the floor, and he sees this tentacle moving around. So, and then finally at the end of the movie, Pattinson is able to get up in there with the light, and he stares into it, and you don't see what he's seeing, but he has this look of horror, and the I don't know if the washed out would be the proper term, but we get this kind of saturated look, and then also the sound becomes distorted as he's screaming. And I read a quote from the director where he was asked what Robert Pattinson sees, and he said, well, and I read this, so I didn't hear him saying it, so I don't know what his tone is, but he said, well, I didn't want the viewer to see what Pattinson sees, because he said, if you would see that, then you would befall the same fate as him. So, but to briefly kind of touch on what the meaning of the movie is.
I'll jump in and say,
sure,
much more powerful. not for us to see what he saw. Like
Yeah.
nothing you
Oh,
could
yeah.
present as a director could be as powerful as just, us imagining whatever horror he's beholding.
Yeah, exactly. But I read one article that I read. They talked a lot about that there's a lot of Greek mythology in this. So at the very end, you have Pattinson, and he's lying on the rocks, and there's a seagull. I don't know if it's supposed to be the same seagull that he killed or if it's another seagull, but that is eating his intestines.
Right.
And
like Prometheus.
Yeah, exactly like Prometheus. But you also have these clearly, the tentacle stuff that we see. I think that's a clear Lovecraft nod. So and also, so another thing that was brought up is I read some quotes from Dafoe, and there's a scene in the movie where the two of them get very drunk and they're dancing with each other and they almost kiss.
Yeah.
And Dafoe said, and I didn't necessarily, until there was a scene where they almost kissed, I didn't necessarily feel this way, but Dafoe said that he felt that there was a lot of homoeroticism in this. And he said that in the script, it actually says that as the script is written, it says that the lighthouse looks like a giant penis. So Dafoe clearly felt that, there was this homoeroticism. It's hard for me to say that. And Pattinson said that when he talked to the director about the film, that he said, I did not want to make a movie about a magical lighthouse. I wanted to make a movie about a guy going insane. So I think from Pattinson's, Pattinson said that. So I think from his point of view, this was just about a guy going crazy. So I kind of think ultimately, the director just took some different elements that he liked and kind of threw them together. And that, I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all, but I don't necessarily know that there is one definitive theme. And I'll tell you, you go ahead and say what you think about that. And then I'll tell you what ultimately in my opinion, what I think it was really about.
Yeah. All of that makes perfect sense to me, because I think it is a movie about a man going insane. And I think it is a movie about two men at the end of the 18th century alone, two men who choose a solitary life, who know they're going to be alone with other men. Homoeroticism and sailors is not a new trope. Mm-hmm. And homoeroticism and the ancient Greeks is not a new trope. And I think that the ancient Greek mythology of Poseidon and Prometheus has shot through. I would say the only thing is, so I think it's a movie about all of those things. Ultimately, it's a movie about two men on a lighthouse and, who are marooned. Mm-hmm. And spoiler alert, one kills the other. One goes mad and kills the other. So I think that's what the movie is about. And I think this movie sort of shows what that looks like with an increasing, as we get more increasingly inside their heads, the heads of the murderer, right? Inside of Pattinson's head. It's interesting because I didn't, obviously the lighthouse is a phallic. Freud would say anything, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but a big lighthouse is a big phallic symbol. Mm-hmm. But nothing in the shooting of it, it didn't, I never saw the shots of the lighthouse and thought, oh, it's a dick. Yeah. There's nothing sexual in the setting of it. What I got from the cinematography was bleak, isolated, alone. Sometimes I think the shooting of it did paint the magic lighthouse picture, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it made the lighthouse seem special and exceptional and remarkable. And, you know, I didn't think that I've been to lighthouses, and the fact that somehow they cast that giant glass thing, somebody had to blow that, you know?
Right.
Well, I don't know if you blow that, but it's a mold. It's remarkable. It's this huge faceted thing of glass, and you look at it and you're like, wow, that's amazing. How did they do that?
And it's beautiful the way he shoots
Yes.
it, you know?
Yes. So you really, certainly at the end of the 1890s, there's this sort of wonder and magic to it. I don't think it is a magic lighthouse, and I don't think he sees, you know, Promethean god fire in the thing, but I love that they played with when he finally beholds the fire that the gods don't want man to have. It's too much for his mind, and that's the final straw. And I love that he comes to see this sort of tyrannical, older sea salt who, I want to put a pin in the homosexuality for a second, but as he starts to, you know, he has one of those drunken evenings. He describes Poseidon with his sort of lower half being tentacles, or, you know, like a mermaid, but have octopus at the bottom. Like, you know, there's a number of different depictions of Dafoe that are clearly sort of evocative of Poseidon. One where you literally see the sort of Lovecraftian tentacles writhing in the background as though they are part of him. And another where he is nude or mostly nude, but, you know, Dafoe has got this crazy barrel chest. Like apparently he does a lot of yoga, and he looks like those yogis. Like, he's very wiry and thin, but he has this big barrel shaped rib cage. And there's a shot of him sort of standing like right on the side of an urn where he's sort of in 3/4 view, mostly profile, and either nude or mostly nude. And you really just see, and it's clearly with the beard. He's not holding a trident, but you can imagine the trident in his hand, you know? So they're really painting that picture of the authority figure. Like, maybe this guy is the god of the sea, and he's tormenting me, and the gulls are doing his will. And, you know, I think if you flip the camera over to the Dafoe side, he's an uneducated man. He's an old sea salt. He knows what he's doing. He's a bit of a tyrant. You know, he's a bit of a sadist. Like, he enjoys and keeping the light to himself, but also not doing the heavy labor and making the other guy squirm. And I think he is attracted to the other guy. You know, Pattinson's a good-looking person. He's a younger man, and there's a funny affection to the cruelty, like the need to dominate feels like there's a sexual subversion to that, and the moment where they almost kiss is pretty clearly being driven by Dafoe.
Yeah.
And I think homosexuality, we have such a contemporary idea of what it means to be gay. Well, okay. So apologies. I'll say me, but I've learned a lot. You know, we grew up in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and it was always this sort of opaque thing. Until I lived in San Francisco for a while and lived in New York for the better part of 20 years. And actually made friends who are gay that I realized, oh, you know, people who are gay are just like all other people. They're all different shapes and sizes, and they have different tastes, and it's just, they happen to be attracted to people of the same sex. And that doesn't necessarily mean A, B, or C. And I think, like, when you talk about sailors or samurai or whatever, it defies a more conventional stereotype of what gay might be considered by some viewers, in that they don't think of it. It's just, I mean, I think in 1890, it was probably an urge that was unspoken and undiscussed and socially unaccepted, but it happened and it was there. And I think, it was sort of like Brokeback Mountain. Certain people is like, oh, so it's just gonna be you and another guy out on the mountain for 4 months. That sounds really lonely and boring. And you think, well, I don't know, it sounds kind of great. And I think that this was subtle enough in a way that it's just sort of like, it's not just that, I don't know. I now I'm self-conscious because I don't want to say something offensive that I don't mean to say. I just think that we see like this kiss and it feels fraught to me as a viewer. And then I stop and check myself for a minute and be like, well, is it really so crazy to think that a man who would have chosen to be married to the sea, as it were, his whole life with other sailors wouldn't have been the kind of person who wanted the company of other men almost exclusively? I mean, he mentions his wife
Yeah.
that, is what did he say? Like 12 Christmases, he missed at sea or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
which is not to say that the homosexuality at the time was like considered okay, but I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with this. Does this make any sense?
Yeah,
Like
it makes sense.
It felt true to me in the movie.
Mhm.
And it was shocking and a surprise, which I think was how Pattinson's character reacted to it
Right.
in the moment. But it didn't feel forced or, and I think Pattinson even had a moment where there was some indication that there was a curiosity, or if not an interest. He peeks through the roof and he sort of sees, I guess it's him masturbating, or he's sort of humping the bed.
Right.
I mean, there's a couple of times where he sees him nude and he continues to watch, so there's at least, if not an interest, there's at least a curiosity
Mm-hmm.
that all felt true to me somehow. Like he
Sure.
was clearly, they're both loners. I don't know. I just thought it was really, and it's making a big deal. It's not a big deal in the movie,
No.
but it's there and it feels like a true thing. And it does definitely ratchet up the pressure between the characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't think about any kind of um, homosexual aspect of it until the kiss. You have, or they nearly kiss, I think. You have, like I said before, Pattinson going into the shed. There's more than one scene where we see him in the shed, and it's raining and water's coming through, and he's masturbating in there. And I suppose that could be read as, he's suppressing some feeling that he has for Dafoe, but I more took it as just he's a fairly young guy and he's in a lighthouse for a month and there's no women around,
Well, to me, it was more the nature of the images we saw him thinking about, right?
Yeah.
The latter time he's seen the mermaid, he's imagining the mermaid. He has this little scrimshaw mermaid, and they're fairly violent, right? There's sort of images of him thrusting a spear like he's killing her, but also mating with her.
Right.
You know what I mean? And none of that. It's not to judge what people imagine. Like, people imagine whatever they imagine to get them off, and sometimes it's kind of out of the box stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what it kind of painted to me was, especially after Pattinson's character described what had happened to his partner when he was a logger, right? Made me think Pattinson's character might just already be a psychopath, not Hannibal Lecter, but somebody who isn't really capable of empathy, right? And he describes the feeling of like watching the other guy, not helping the other guy out of the way of the logs, because the other guy was a real pain in his ass, and then just not feeling anything when he saw the guy swept away by that avalanche of logs, and just thinking, I need a cigarette, and being a little disturbed by realizing that he didn't. It's why'd you spill your beans? Like, why did you admit that to me and yourself? And you start to think, oh, maybe he's just a psychopath, and he is on the run, and he's constantly trying to find some other situation where he doesn't not only have to be around other people, but really have to come face to face with some truths about himself. Right. And that's the real pressure. And it doesn't help that the Dafoe character has got a lot going on. It is a difficult guy to spend time with. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
just thought it was brilliant how many layers there were to this. And at the end, you're not spoon-fed some answer, right? At the end, what you're actually left with is this magical Promethean imagery of him suffering the fate of having, you know, stolen or gone up to behold the fire of the gods, the forbidden light. Either way, he's doomed because he has killed the other man. So whether
Mhm.
he's rescued or not, he's either alone on the rock and he's a dead man alone, or, you know, a ship comes and they discover he kills him with an axe. So it's like
Right.
it's not a lot of gray area there. Like that's the end for him.
Right.
All that's left is torment. And I just thought it's a beautiful, poetic way to end a movie that really loved to play with ambiguity in the imagery. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know where I'm going with some of these thoughts. They just sort of spool out.
and I think you're right. I think if you could talk to the director, I think that he would probably say there's maybe no right or wrong answer, that it's, you know, what the viewer interprets. One theory that I had that I think is a somewhat of a possibility for this is, so Willem Dafoe's name is Thomas, and through most of the movie, so Willem Dafoe is Thomas Wake. Well, through most of the movie, when it's a good ways in before they finally talk about their names. So Robert Pattinson says
Thomas
that his
Wick, right? Wick.
or Thomas Wake. Yeah. What did I say? Thomas Wayne?
No, wick,
Oh.
like the wick of a candle. That's what I heard.
No, what it says on IMDb is Wake.
Oh, that's so different for me. Because me, I
Okay.
thought wick, like he's literally
He's the
thing
literal
that
wick.
gives the flame. It's like the light is consumes him and is of him. Like without him, there isn't the
Oh,
light.
okay.
Oh, that's so interesting. But it's wake, so it's much more
Yeah, that's what it says.
nautical, really.
Right. So, but Pattinson says that his name is Ephraim Winslow.
Right.
So it's not until later in the movie that one of the scenes when they're both very drunk that he confesses to Willem Dafoe that, and you touched on it, that he had let this guy die. Or, you know, the guy was dying and he didn't help him.
Didn't murder him.
Yeah, he didn't murder him, but he allowed him to die.
You could have saved him and didn't.
Right. And so he had taken his name, and he admits that his name is actually Tom as well. But instead of being Thomas, he said that he's Tommy. So he's Tommy, Willem Dafoe is Thomas. And I took this as maybe there's one scene where he's up atop the lighthouse. I think it's where he finally goes up and he's in there. And I think maybe before I forget the chronology of this, but I think he's fighting with Willem Dafoe, and then Dafoe is on the ground and rolls over, and he's Pattinson. It's almost like a Empire Strikes Back where, you know, Luke Skywalker fights Vader, and, you know, he cuts open his mask.
There's a lot of farting.
Yeah, there's a lot of farting, but he cuts open his mask, and it's Luke's face in there. So I wondered if maybe they're the same person, that Dafoe is the older version of him, and he has just gone totally insane. Pattinson has, and he's just by himself on the island. Maybe Dafoe existed, and, you know, he killed him, and then it's just them. You know, he was some other person. I don't know, but you know, the fact that I thought that was really interesting, that when he admits this to him, he says, well, my name is Tom. It's Thomas Howard. And he says Tommy. So that almost led me to believe that that's a younger version of this. You know, Dafoe was the older version and he's the younger version. Now, the fact that when they first go onto the island, it's really interesting because there's the changing of the guard where they pass by the two guys that they're replacing and they don't even speak. They just walk past each other, which I thought was really interesting. So, you know, maybe my theory isn't right because they're it definitely should be that there are two people on the island. But I kind of wondered if it was just he went insane and it's that they are both the same person.
Well, it's definitely a harmonic that plays into the whole. It doesn't need to be a yes or a no or that's it. What's great about this movie is that it evokes a lot of different things to think about in a meaningful way. None of which detract from the film, but also make it fun to do a conversation like this about. I mean, to me, it's sort of like, oh, is that what I'm going to be like when I get? Am I that now? Is that my destiny? Am I going to grow up to be that? Right. I also, when I say, the other thought I had is like, when I say he's psychotic or a psychopath, I'm thinking of it. Do you ever watch Mad Men?
I mean, I'm familiar with it, but I never really watched the show.
Yeah. Okay. So this won't make a ton of sense to you, but one of the things that's really interesting about Mad Men is the character of Don Draper, right? The John Hamm character. Whether or not he's clinically a psychopath, he does the same thing, right? He
takes another guy's name.
Exactly. He grows up in Korea, but he grows up in an extremely abusive, emotionally abusive and a neglectful thing as a child, right? And then he goes off to Korea, and it's just him and another guy stationed at a place, and he can't wait to get out of there. And the other guy in an attack just gets completely blown to smithereens. And sort of all that's left is a bunch of hamburger and his dog tags. And so he takes the dog tags and he switches identities with the guy and comes back and becomes a sort of successful advertising man. But his rise to fame is very cold and fairly soulless. And one of the genius things about the series is John Hamm's ability to remain, he's an anti-hero. Like, we root for him and we follow Don Draper and we love Don Draper, but he disregards a lot of people's feelings. He hurts a lot of people along the way. And there's glimmers of his awareness of having done that and not feeling good about that. Like, if you told Don Draper he was a monster, he would not want that to be true. He doesn't think of himself as a monster. And I saw that. So whether or not, a psychiatrist would say, oh, he is or he is not a psychopath. The point is that this character in this movie, the Pattinson character, demonstrates like really disturbing empathy issues with other people. And I think it disturbs him as well. Right. And so it's enough for me to be like, is this what I'm going to become? Who am I? What do I stand for? Like, am I the kind of person, like, he doesn't want to tell his history because he is ashamed of it, which is an argument that against being, a really dangerous, violent psychopath. But then what he does is sort of repeat it. He kind of kills his partner. Like, he can't take it, so he kills the other guy. And I think the kind of Promethean, you could also interpret the Promethean ending of, oh God, this is who I am. Like, I am not other. I can't pretend that was a fluke. I deserve this. You know what I mean? There's just so much to kind of mine and think about. And I think what makes it a really, really terrific movie is that it doesn't force answers on you.
Yeah, exactly.
If you say what happens in this movie, it's like two guys go to a lighthouse, they go a little stir crazy, and then they're stranded in a big storm for an undisclosed period of time. And they kind of go insane, and one of them kills the other.
Yeah. And
what you get is this much more interesting tapestry of learning about the characters and trying to figure out what it means. And you really care. Like, I care what it means.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. And I like that you can it leaves it open for you to have your own interpretation of specific events and scenes, and it's like we went through the same things, but your takeaways from it might be different than mine. I just think that's amazing filmmaking. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I think, also he may or may not be a psychopath or sociopath, but he obviously knows that that alcohol brings out these dangerous parts of him, because he does not want to drink. And as soon as he says, Willem Dafoe in the first night tries to get him to drink with him, and he says, "Oh no, I don't," so okay, this guy has a drinking problem, and if he starts drinking, things are going to unravel. And finally, it's the last night that they're going to be there, and Willem Dafoe
they think it's the last.
You think it's the last night, yeah? And he says, "Hey, it's the last night. Let's drink." And then things start to unravel. But we have these scenes that we see more than once that foreshadows his confession that he's going to make, where we see these logs, coming up towards the shore. And there's one scene where he just wades out into the water and these logs are all around him. And I don't know if he sees the guy's face that had died then, but I think he has, when he confesses it to Willem Dafoe, I think he has suppressed that maybe he doesn't even remember that what happened, because it was so terrible, and he probably was drunk, and maybe didn't even remember it. So I think I would be shocked if this director is not a Stanley Kubrick fan. So there are even kind of elements of The Shining in this, I felt, where obviously, The Shining, especially the book, is about alcoholism. It was Stephen King, kind of exploring his own alcoholism. So that's a big aspect of it. And you also have the isolation aspect of it. So that's not to say that, every movie where there's alcoholism and isolation is a nod to The Shining, but I think he, was definitely at least a little bit making some references there. So, if anything, this might just be an exploration of alcoholism,
Well, and the movies don't, I don't think that this film hangs the whole thing on that. Right?
No, I don't either.
And I feel like it's pretty clear from the shots and the sound design too. And you hear it in the trailer we played, but there's the light, and then there's a foghorn that's this huge, crazy, otherworldly sound. It made me think of the tripods in Spielberg's version of War of the Worlds, where they have this sort of like, they do that everybody sort of, cowers under. It's like this deafening sound. And so and it's an ominous sound. It's a warning sound, and it's the sound of something coming that you need to try and get out of the way of. And, I didn't interpret it as him having forgotten that it happened, but definitely suppressing it. And in these nightmares, it's haunting him, it's haunting him. God, the mermaid. Oh man. Every time he sees the mermaid, it just terrifies me. But again, the scariest thing about her is she doesn't speak, but she has this sort of scream that she does that's half whale song. It sounds of the sea, but it's just terrifying. Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
For me, this is absolutely a thumbs up. This is definitely not a movie for everybody. I mean, there are some, kind of mainstream audiences. Just the black and white alone, there are some people that say, I don't want to watch a black and white movie. And the Pattinson masturbating and having sex with a scary mermaid, and that's going to turn some people off too. But surprisingly, I was just looking at the numbers. This did $18 million worldwide. It made $10 million in the United States. So I mean, for again a black and white movie about two guys in a lighthouse, that's pretty good. A friend of mine who I feel like has pretty similar tastes to me. I was talking to him about this, and he didn't like it. He said it was one of the weirdest movies he'd ever seen, which it's weird, but I didn't feel like it's so out there that it's inaccessible, you know? I thought it was great. And I mean, this director, you think about this is his second movie, and he made something this accomplished, just from the and it seems to be not that any movie is just one person, but this seems to be a singular vision in a kind of, Kubrick kind of way, I feel, that somewhat like last week when we talked about Gretel and Hansel. I think this is a director that I hope he continues to make films like this. Not that, this Marvel might or DC might, snatch him up to make whatever, the next Batman movie or something. But even though I didn't love The Witch, I still appreciated it. But this one, I just thought was fantastic. I mean, this was again, this isn't a movie for everybody, but for the audience that this is for, I can't imagine people not really liking this.
I agree. I think the specificity of it alone is so great, and the performances are great. Everything we've talked about. It's, I mean, I guess it's a horror movie because it scared the pants off of me.
That's what my brother-in-law said. I said something about it being a horror movie, and he goes, "Was that a horror movie?" And I said, "Well, that's what it's, kind of. It's a mystery, but I mean, there are definitely." Again, this is one kind of like the Gretel and Hansel that we talked about, where somebody that just wants to watch Friday the 13th maybe wouldn't like this because it's going to be too artsy for them.
Right. It's not a slasher.
It's not a slasher, but
and it's not a thriller.
No, but there are, like you said, this just the mermaid alone is haunting. So yeah, this is a horror movie to me.
Well, it follows the Pattinson character more closely, and his experience certainly for the whole second half of the film is rage and horror. Like he is either, furious at what he's having to put up with, or he's terrified of some vision he's seeing. And it really is the portrait of a man going insane. And that's horrifying, isn't it? I mean, nobody has a great time going insane.
No. Yeah, exactly. And Pattinson, he's still, and this seems to happen with every new Batman. I don't think there is anybody that could play Batman that there wouldn't be somebody that wouldn't be upset, say, oh, but people were upset when he was cast as the next Batman because they think he's just the guy from Twilight, and he's showing over and over that he's so much more than that.
Well, you liked him in Tenet too, didn't you?
I thought he was really good in Tenet. Yeah.
Can't wait to see that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some other films of his that more artsy films along this line that I haven't actually seen, but him going head to head with Dafoe, and I think we both agreed that Dafoe's character is a little meatier maybe than the Pattinson character, but still, I mean, he goes head to head with him, and you're not like, oh, this guy is subpar compared to Dafoe.
I feel like the big difference, and I say this as an actor, is if the argument is I didn't want to make a movie about a magic lighthouse, I wanted to make a movie about a man going insane. The actor who is on the magic lighthouse side of the coin has more fun stuff to do. Like it's easier to have more fun, even if you're having scary fun with making a movie about a magic lighthouse. Then making a movie about a man going insane is exhausting, and it's a lot of hard work, and it's pretty dire. And I feel like if you divide if those are Pattinson's words and you divide the movie along those lines, not only is Willem Dafoe a master actor, but he gets the more fun part of the dish, and he does have fun with it. And it's
you could almost think that Pattinson is the straight man in this.
Well, he is. When Dafoe farts in his face, Pattinson gets to do the slow burn. Like, oh my God, the indignity.
And as dark as this movie is, there's some funny.
Oh yeah,
there's some funny lines and funny scenes in this.
Yeah. There's not a lot of fun in the second half. It's mostly hanging on by one hand. But man, I can't recommend it highly enough. I think it's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, this is I can't think of anything that I've seen in the last few months or last year that I would say was any better than this. I mean, it's highly recommended for me.
Yeah. Are we gonna do The Vampire's Kiss for next week?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay, excellent. So Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com if you have anything to say. Otherwise, if you're sticking with us, why don't we watch The Vampire's Kiss for next week, sticking with our October theme of scary movies on a Halloween theme. And we will talk to you next week.